Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining the Regional Food Conference hosted by us For the Region. We're delighted to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. And as you're aware, this is the first of two sessions that will make up this year's Regional Food Conference. Now, the Regional Food Conference has a number of ambitions, not least to provide a space for sharing updates, sharing knowledge, making connections, and potentially emerging some collaborative projects, or at least some shared objectives that we can all work towards over the coming year. And we've been running these food conferences now for a couple of years, and they've proved popular and insightful. And it's always a great opportunity to hear from partners right across South West Wales, which, as you know, is the four counties of Swansea, Neath, Talbot, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, to share updates on relevant projects and to reaffirm our shared commitment to creating a sustainable local food economy for South West Wales. At the end of last year's meeting, we published a regional food report, which many of you will have seen, and that outlined some key priorities and some drivers for change, which are shared by partners in the public sector, in the private sector, in communities, things that we can do individually, things that we can do by working together, and how we can best prioritise and promote the mission of enabling more local, sustainable, regenerative agriculture, improving the health and well-being of people and communities across our region, and of course supporting local businesses, growers and food producers in our food sector across those four counties and beyond. It's sort of a porous boundary, isn't it, when you're talking about agriculture and food production. And I know that it's a mission that many in the room are passionately committed to, as we are. And it's going to be a useful discussion this evening to talk about how we can, to some extent, burst our bubble, because I know we come here together very much aligned on our values around the importance of sustainable local food for the region. And as we move forward with the discussion, I'd like to think about how we reach out wider and put this agenda at the top of everyone's priorities in the year ahead. And I think there are some exciting opportunities for collaboration. There are some really great projects and initiatives happening across our region, some fantastic businesses expanding and starting up in the local food space, and hoping to hear from some of you this evening. So hopefully it will be an inspiring session, hopefully a nice way to kick off 2023 with a renewed commitment to supporting and strengthening the regional food system. It's important from the perspective of the climate emergency and the biodiversity and environmental crisis. It's important from the perspective of tackling food poverty and economic inequality in the context of the cost of living crisis and the real challenges that many people are facing around accessing healthy food. And it's important from a resilience perspective. You know, COVID, sorry to mention COVID, but shocked us all, didn't it, in how it disrupted our food supply chains. And perhaps that was a dress rehearsal for the kinds of difficulties and economic, environmental and social shocks that will undoubtedly become more frequent over the coming years. So how resilient is our food system? And sometimes it's not until it breaks that we realize how fragile something is. But we see the purpose of these meetings in connecting people across the food system, in shining a light on good practice and learning from each other, and in collaborating to strengthen the food system. We see that as a key response to the uncertainties of our time and the need to develop resilience so that we're better able to adapt and cope with the challenges of our time. We're really grateful to have the support of BIC Innovation and NutriWales, who've come on board as sponsors to give us a little bit of resource to run this event. We're also really delighted to have NRW as partners, and Swansea Environmental Forum and Group Resilience in Pembrokeshire as key stakeholders in bringing together today's conversation. But unlike many conferences and webinars, we haven't lined up a whole load of so-called expert speakers. We're working on the basis that everyone in this room is an expert in something, and we'd love you all to share your updates, share your perspectives, and contribute to the discussion as we go on. I can see lots of people already saying hello in the chat, so please do feel free to use the chat feed as we go on, and that will be a useful resource for us as we're compiling our notes. Please do share links and references in the chat if you think those would be useful, links to interesting projects and initiatives that you think we may not be aware of, yeah, we'll certainly be compiling all the outputs from today's session and tomorrow's session into what we hope will be an actionable document summarising the discussions and outlining opportunities for collaboration going forward. But as always, we like to start these discussions with a commitment to our sense of purpose around this. So I'm going to invite you all to join a very short and snappy little breakout room discussion to kick this session off. And I would like you to have a quick conversation with whoever you find yourself in a room with, and it'll just be around 3 or 4 people. Why do you care about the regional food sector? Why is this conversation important to you? So take a few moments now while I'm setting up those breakout rooms just to either jot down for yourself or reflect quietly on your own answer to that question. Why do you care about the regional food system? Why is this conversation important to you? We'll be jumping into breakout rooms shortly. I know a few people are still just coming into the meeting, so I'll repeat the question. But why do you care about the regional food system? And why is this conversation important to you? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on your own answers to that question. Write down perhaps 3 reasons. Why do you care? And be ready to share those in a small group discussion as a way to reflect on our shared sense of purpose around this topic, and start from a place of understanding why we're here. Why does this conversation matter? And as you have these conversations in your small groups, think about what commonalities you hear. Are you saying the same thing? Are you agreeing? And what stands out? Is there some different perspective that you haven't considered before? And we'd love to hear from you in a few minutes when you come back in. So if you've had a moment to jot down some thoughts about why this conversation is important to you, I'm going to open the breakout rooms and invite you to have a short conversation with just a few people, and don't spend all your time introducing yourselves. Try and answer that question. Why do you care about the regional food system? Why is this conversation important to you? I'm going to give you 10 minutes, so that's not very long for a conversation, but I'll look forward to hearing from you all when you come back. Okay, you should see a thing come up on your screen inviting you to join a breakout room, so please go ahead and do that, and I'll bring you back in here in 10.
This meeting is being recorded.
Meeting is being recorded. Welcome back. Welcome back from your breakout room discussions. I hope there was enough time to have a bit of a whip round, and apologies, I was moving some people around to try and distribute the groups. It's funny when you do the random generation of breakout rooms, you look at them and then you realise you put people in with people they talk to all the time. So if I moved you around a bit, I hope that was not too confusing. Right, so I'd love to hear some reflections from those discussions from anyone there. And I suppose what I'm asking for is any reflections, were there sort of common themes emerging from your discussion, or any new perspectives that you'd like to share? Yeah, why is this conversation important to you? Why do you care about the regional food system? So please feel free to put your hand up, and I'll be looking for waving hands and raised hands. And of course, you can also use the chat if you would rather do that, but I'm waiting for someone to go first. Who would like to share? Why is this conversation important to you? Jackie, nice to see you. Why are you here? Why do you care about the regional?
Because I love you. That's why, Dawn and Zoe. And I think I can see, well, I did see a fellow colleague of mine, Susie, is in the room as well. Wonderful. Nice to see you, Susie. Amazing. From my perspective, then, Zoe and I were jumped out of one room into another. I think it's really important that all the dots are joined up. You know, we're losing agricultural land in Wales, you know, being taken over by other things. And I think it's really, we need to be the voice of producing local food for local people. And that's really important for me, right across the board, to be honest. And how does Pembrokeshire assist Neath, Talbot, for example? How does Carmarthenshire assist Ceredigion? Because even though they're not in this group, I think there's, you know, there's some great produce being produced in that area as well. So we mustn't forget that we're wider than this region. So that's why I'm here. And also, like I said, because I love you.
Oh, thanks for the endorsement. I'm glad you went first. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, it's urgent from the perspective of farmers. This conversation is overdue, isn't it? And this issue is really urgent. How do we better support our regional agricultural systems? Margot, why do you care about the regional food system?
All four of us in our room, in one way or another, said they wanted everyone to enjoy good food all the time, and it not be just one area or one class or for one occasion, but that. And several of us are from an older generation where we regularly cook from scratch, and we think that talent skill is missing from some of the younger generations, and we hope that this kind of movement can do that. There was also somebody from Trinity St. David's Lampeter wanting to set up better education for children around food, and to shorten the supply lines to make it not so costly outside of our areas. Us.
Thank you, Margot. Looking forward to getting into discussion on those themes as the evening progresses. Maggie, why do you care about the regional food system?
Well, it's the future. It's just got to be. It's for food resilience, food security, for better food, healthier food. But really, I'd like to pick up on something Zoe was just beginning to say when we lost our breakout room, and that was how we desperately need a paradigm shift, and we don't really know how to do it, do we? We need to get out of this box, which is large-scale farming and the whole planet being divided up into producing food in plantations and huge things. And we need to believe in regional foods and regional food security. And how do we do it? This is my question. Thank you.
Important question. Thank you, Maggie. And Ayana, why do you care about the regional food system?
Hello. Of course, because it's healthy, you know. It's when I go to the supermarket, you know, I can see that I think I can say 80% of food, it's poison. And then it's because it's processed, yes. and it's poisoned with chemicals. And then we get sick, you know, and NHS is really falling down, and so many people is suffering. And we should change it for us, for our kids, for everyone. I can't really, it breaks my heart, you know, when I see how kids, I try to even go to the supermarket and buy organic food, but it doesn't taste organic anymore. And I would like to go somewhere to Gower, you know, sometimes I buy it in the market, you know, food, the vegetables. But I would like to be sure that they are from good hands.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's such an important part of it, isn't it? It's taking agency over our own health, which, as you say, is really, really important. And that whole thing about kind of knowing where our food comes from, knowing that it's unprocessed and we can trust it. These are really important issues. But I think it's, you know, it is interesting to consider that the majority of people are not accessing healthy local food, and that this isn't as high on people's agenda as those of us in this room feel that it should be. So I'm really interested to unpick some of that tonight and see how we can expand this movement and include more people and really speak to the issues around food that ordinary people are facing. But thank you all for sharing. I think there are more great insights in the chat. Anyone else want to speak up and tell us, why are you here? Why do you care about the regional food system? And if you're a man, you're welcome to speak as well. We've had all women's voices so far. Great. Elizabeth, why do you care about the regional food system?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. Well, I want a healthy population. And we're in an epidemic of diet-related, well, a worsening epidemic of diet-related non-communicable diseases, which are food-related. So one way of looking at that is to go back to the soil and improve soil health. And I've just shared the link to a very interesting conversation that was had at Oxford Real Farming Conference just a couple of weeks ago. It's really shocking, actually. The use of glyphosate in agricultural practices is decimating the health, the environment of humans, and nobody's shouting out about it. So please watch that video. It's very illuminating.
Thank you. Do share links in the chat to interesting resources. I'm sure they would be of interest to people, and we'll certainly circulate links following the meeting. Julian, why are you here? Why do you care about the regional food system?
Well, I was pressured as a man there to speak, so thank you, David, also for putting his hand up. And I think the nutrition is a key thing, but the other piece there is actually we need people to be valuing their food more. And if people can see the value that the local food is having to their local economy and jobs for them, jobs for their friends and family, they'll hopefully start to value good food more. So I think that link between the nutrition and the local benefits is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And strengthening that local economy by keeping more of our spending in the local area, and yeah, supporting those smaller producers and growers who I think are having a particularly difficult time. David, thanks for putting your hand up. Why do you care about the regional food system?
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. I think one of the things that concerns me is the number of really, really good initiatives which are under incredible pressure all the time. And the fact that, you know, sort of, as you've already alluded to, we don't break through to scale. And I'm interested in hearing a discussion about how we might do that. I mean, you know, sort of, we have technologies that allow us to, you know, sort of to integrate. We hear of the possibilities of crowd farming, but I wonder, where is the organizing focus for that, and how do we break through? It's just small issues.
Yeah, just a few small things. I'm sure we can sort those out by tomorrow lunchtime. But you've teed me up there for the next discussion we're having, which is all about how do we kind of grow the demand, grow the market for local food. So just a few words, first of all, about the kind of format for the rest of this evening's session. We're going to have that conversation about increasing the demand for local and sustainably produced food. Then we're going to have a bit of an open mic opportunity for partners, colleagues, local businesses to share updates with all of us. We'd love to hear from you if you've got a project or a business or a piece of work that you would like to share. This, as I said at the beginning, is a useful platform for sharing those updates across the region, and no doubt we'll hear updates from some of the projects that we heard from last time. Lovely to sort of catch up with how things are going. And then the second kind of conversational topic for this evening will be about school dinners and how we can get more locally grown produce onto the plates of kids in our schools, and that really taps into that whole discussion about engaging with young people, which came through really strongly last time we met, the importance of the younger generation and their attitudes and understanding about food and where it comes from. But as David alluded to there, you know, there's a big job to do in broadening the conversation and waking more and more people up to the vital importance of buying local and thinking about the sustainability of our food choices. And I'm often reminded that we are working in a bubble, that when we bring together a meeting like this, it brings together those of us who are already passionate about this, who perhaps are already doing our best to make sustainable local food choices, although that's not always easy, and none of us has got that completely nailed, certainly not me. But I'd love to have a conversation about how we could collaborate across South West Wales to really raise these issues right up the agenda for people who are not already in our bubbles, whether those are bubbles around environmental activism or local economy or food poverty. How can we break out of our own bubble and make this an issue that more and more people care about? And maybe we can think about successful behaviour change campaigns that were effective in encouraging people to change their behaviour and make different choices, because it's often not as easy as just giving people the information. It's difficult to effect behaviour change. But, you know, my dream is that everyone would be prioritising local and sustainable choices wherever they are choosing local food. And I've started asking in cafes and restaurants and bars in particular, what are the local options? What local gin does some do you have on offer, and what's local on the menu? And it is a bit demoralizing, actually, that even those businesses that we hope would be offering more local choices actually are not doing as well as we would hope. And I wonder what other people's experiences are of asking that question in cafes and restaurants. So let's have a discussion about how we could collaborate to promote local and sustainably sourced food across the region, how we could rise this up people's list of priorities, despite the fact that people are dealing with many different challenges. How can we start to connect the dots for people about the challenges they're facing in their lives, and how potentially embracing the kind of local food and good food movements could help to tackle some of those challenges. There are, I don't need to tell you this, but there are loads of benefits to buying local food, and we've talked about some of them already. We would hope that local food would be fresher and more nutritious, often doesn't have to travel such long distances, so kind of been picked more recently, and therefore more nutritious. Supporting local farmers is a key driving force for those of us who are really motivated about this. We've been hearing in the news recently about the mental health challenges and the terrible situation that local farmers are grappling with across Swansea and South West Wales. So supporting them is really important part of this. Clearly reducing the carbon footprint of our food. Food that's shipped from all over the world just doesn't make sense. Eating seasonally. So this is a challenge, isn't it? Eating locally throws up its own challenges around what's available at different times of year. So there has to be this whole conversation about our food choices and what is available locally. Can we design our menus and our shopping baskets around seasonal produce and being better aware of what's available at different times of year? And then things like building community as well. So buying locally sourced produce also helps to create that sense of community and connection to place, and connecting with our local farmers and food producers, learning where our food comes from, and developing a deeper appreciation for all the hard work that goes into growing. But building those local connections helps to develop that sense of community in local places. And of course, supporting local farmers and the diversity of different crops and farming techniques helps to encourage biodiversity and helps us to maintain or re-establish a more diverse agricultural landscape, which is really important in the face of the nature emergency that we're dealing with. I'd like you to just think for a few moments and jot down a few notes for yourself, first of all, about what do you think the barriers are to buying local food? You know, why is it difficult? What are some of the barriers? I mean, we face barriers ourselves, don't we? Even though we're really motivated, it's not always easy to find or buy local produce. And clearly there are huge barriers for many people. Reflect for yourself on what some of those barriers are, and then perhaps we can consider how we might collaborate to make good, healthy local food more available. What are some of the barriers? And you can type your thoughts straight into the chat, but if anyone would like to raise a hand and reflect on what you think some of the barriers to more local food consumption are, or any reflections on this challenge of promoting local food, I would love to hear from you. Susie, yes, please. What do you think are some of the barriers?
Well, I think the main one is cost and perception of cost. So, you know, some people's belief that it's going to just, it's out of their price range. They have to go to a supermarket because everything's much cheaper. And, you know, but having said that, I think also we need to find ways to make it much more affordable and accessible. You know, I manage the farmers markets in Uplands and Marina and Mumbles, and last year we had a market a couple of years ago in Neath, and we couldn't get enough traders to go because we couldn't get enough customers to go. And you get to a point where, you know, it's just not big enough to attract anybody. And we had to close it, which was a real shame. And for the people who were coming regularly, you know, they were really disappointed, but we just couldn't keep going. So whereas obviously, you know, we're, as you said before about being in our bubble. So in Uplands and Mumbles, we're going great guns. The people selling fresh produce doing well, but trying to expand that, you know, is tricky. And I feel that it's, like I said, it's cost and perception of cost are the main things. And, you know, also, as we touched on before, education and, you know, people needing to know how to cook, not just how to get processed food and all, you know, it's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is huge. Thanks, Susie. Great to have you with us. Thanks for coming along. And I think it's interesting that it's hard to make these local food businesses sustainable, and we hear that all the time from different parts of the system, really. Entrepreneurs and innovators and local producers, despite all of us talking all the time about how much we want to support local food, it is actually really difficult to make these sorts of initiatives viable. And I suppose that's partly depends on exactly whereabouts you are, but it's interesting to hear some of those differences. And also, yeah, it's cost, and it's also perception of cost. Is it always more expensive to buy local? Does it have to be? Great questions. Thanks, Susie. Mary, would you like to reflect on some of the barriers?
Yeah, some of them have been covered, but I think one thing is where are they? How do people find out about them? You know, it's I think that's a big thing, that people don't actually know about them, and that's one thing. And I know distance has been mentioned, and getting there, and that of course involves transport, doesn't it? You know, if you're a family who's struggling to buy food, you may not have a car, you may not be able to afford a bus journey, and anybody, you know, so it's accessibility in that way, I think. And then not knowing how to cook seasonal food as well. But I think for me, where are they and accessibility are the two big things.
Yeah, and maybe the first of those is one that we could collaborate to resolve, you know, the difficulty of actually finding local producers, and how could we collaborate to support local producers to kind of amplify what they do and reach more people. But the travel challenges are real as well, you know, especially when local produce is often grown and harvested in rural areas where we know that the transport links are really poor for people without access to a car. Phil, lovely to have you with us. Thanks again to BIC for being one of our partners in this event. What do you think are the barriers to more local food?
I always base the question on us all collectively, and all of society, most of society having the power in their pockets to influence change. So the two previous speakers quite rightly said that cost is perceived as a big issue. So when they're saying about cost, what they're actually talking about is monetary affordability. And we, as you know, and yourselves, are influencing a different, cost is one thing, affordability, but value is another. And how do we get people to perceive and understand the different value for the food? So what is the regional or community value of a particular product? How many people are employed in the production of that product within 10 miles of where you buy it? How many people are involved in the processing of that product before it gets to your shop or your retail outlet? How many people, how many mouths, how many families are sustained by the growing and the production of that product before it gets to your table? So I hear some of the things about processed and working from scratch and working from scratch, and I understand those motivations. But if I can employ 100 people taking local raw materials from the land and produce it into a finished product, yeah, and then sell it locally, I'm not just helping the people who get it, who buy it, who purchase it. I'm helping all those mouths it feeds and all those families it sustains as well. So we need to start thinking about a different method of assessing what the value of a product is. We're already influencing public procurement in assessing things other than cost. And I think we need to get this value in being projected from the producers as well. When they go to their stall in their local market, they should say, in the winter, I employ 10 people. In the summer or the autumn, when I'm collecting my harvest, I employ 30 people. These people all live in this region. This is where we start valuing things in a different way. And that is what I want to project, and the idea which I'd like people to consider. How it's done, well, it isn't easy. We know, we've tried. So it's just a matter really of cost is a big influence. We understand in the cost of living crisis, and obviously cost is a big influence. But when I can buy the right product that's been produced in the right way, yeah, and buy it from a local source, and I have the ability to do so, I will make that choice. Now, I can do that because I have the information available to me to make those choices. We need to give people the right information to make the right choices. And that's as much on the producer's table as on the recipient's table. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, important message there. And how can we make those additional values more visible when people are making their food choices? That's a really important question. Thank you, Phil. Sophie and Susie.
Hello,
we'd love to hear
hi.
from you. Hi, thanks for joining.
So all of what you're talking about with this particular issue is so relevant to us. We run a business where we try to use as many local produce ingredients as we can. So we're based on Gower, but we don't only look at Gower, we look at Swansea wider area and beyond. And we take as many of those ingredients as we can and create and cook dishes that people can then pop into their ovens at home. So we're talking sort of chicken pies and lasagnas and things. So we're trying really hard to work with local producers and are doing so every day. And it's brilliant. And all of the reasons that you've outlined, actually, Dawn, in your introduction, I mean, it's sort of like you wrote our business plan for us. So thanks for that. But the reasons that it's a challenge are, from a business point of view, but also as mums and local people, are sort of the same. And I think the two biggest ones come down to cost. Obviously, it is more expensive to buy locally grown vegetables, locally reared meat. It just is, and significantly more so. But also less relevant to us as a business, but as parents, as human beings, the convenience of it. You know, you can't go to one place and buy everything you need, and most people work at least part-time, if not full-time, and often both parents if it's in a family. And so the unfortunate reality is that supermarkets are just much more convenient and they're cheaper, and those are two major hurdles to overcome for working families. But hopefully not impossible to overcome.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on what Phil said, and we are when we make our dishes, we try to explain the story behind why our product costs as it does, and most of our customers actually understand why it costs as it does, because they understand that we have cooked it for them and we have sourced the ingredients and we've tried to find the best that we can as local as we can. So a lot of our customers understand that story. But going back to what Phil said about growers, I think once you understand the story and you understand the methods of which things have been produced and how much can be produced, there is a story that you can follow and there's an understanding. And I feel like if more people had the background story, you don't get that at the supermarket, you just get the price and you get, I need to put that into my shopping basket because I'm on a budget. Whereas when you understand the story of what goes behind the growing, I think you feel like you have got something of more value and you do enjoy it more and you make more of it, but you have to understand the story.
Yeah, really great to hear from you guys, and please do share, if you haven't already, share the links to your business in the chat, because that sounds really fantastic, turning local ingredients into convenient kind of ready meals. Great to hear from you, and yeah, really sort of underlining the importance of convenience. I'm glad that has come through, because that is a huge barrier for so many of us in making better choices. And do we make better choices when we have greater understanding. I'm sure in lots of situations we do make better choices, and kind of food labeling and stuff, it does influence us at the point at which we're purchasing. So how can we amplify those important messages? Thank you. Laura, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think about the barriers?
I think a lot of the issues that we have discussed talk about educating the consumer, giving the consumer access and so on. One of the areas that we've particularly looked over the years across several projects is turning this on its head and looking at how we can get producers to access markets, different channels to market in different ways. And from several conversations we see from farmers to producers to processors making jams and sauces and so on, they increasingly talk about the fact that their success is measured. Can we access supermarkets or retailers? No. Can we access local food markets? But there's limited understanding in terms of how you can access consumers in different ways. But one of the main issues in terms of cost that was tackled, again, looking at it not from a consumer's perspective, but from a producer's perspective, is the fact that a lot of them are small and they lack scale. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the high costs come from. So one of the issues we have been looking at is how we can enhance collaboration between these producers in terms of, for example, collaborating in terms of filling a truck and reducing their transportation cost, accessing joint channels to market and so on. So they can at least reduce accessing, like sharing facilities to reduce rent costs and so on. And that in long term, as we discussed, might tackle the lack of the increased cost we associate with local producers, without rightly so sometimes. And we see this from the labor costs that we experience locally to energy to fixed overheads and so on. So how can local producers, farmers can collaborate better to together achieve greater scale that would potentially reduce their total supply chain costs is something that we're particularly interested in.
Yeah, I share your interest in that, Laura. You know, how we can link things up across our region and create those kind of strong routes to market in partnership with local producers, and try and make that easier. And then the distribution, like you say, is there a collaborative approach to distribute locally produced food more effectively into local markets? Yeah, thank you for your contribution. Zoe, what would you like to say?
Almost forgotten, but I think it was just about cost, really. When cost is comes up, but there are a huge, where we live in South West Wales, as much as there is a lot of people who are suffering through the cost of living crisis, there is an enormous amount of wealth in South West Wales as well, who again, people who want to buy and purchase healthy food, who probably don't know where to go, as somebody mentioned earlier, who sometimes don't know how to cook healthy food. And so like businesses like Susie and Sophie's business is absolutely key. Oh, I've lost my train of thought, I'm really sorry. But so when we're looking at marketing, and who are we marketing to, and marketing to a demographic of person who will keep the local supply chain going in order to help the people who are struggling with the cost of living crisis. It's really important that those who can afford to buy local supply chain understand the importance, understand local, and then it will have a knock-on effect. If those with money don't support the our local food producers, they'll disappear, and we'll all end up eating God knows what from supermarkets, and then everybody will have even worse health than they do now. Sorry.
Yeah, a few interesting points definitely in what you've said there, and I think it is always worth us remembering that although lots of people are unable to afford to spend more on food than they currently do, other people actually do have the disposable income, and many of them are not spending the money locally. So there are different markets of different types of customer to tap into, and that's really important to remember. Yeah, some important points there. Thanks, Zoe. Ayanna, what do you think about some of the barriers?
Yes, basically, I just wanted to mention something that for me, it always comes that question to my head. Why local food is more expensive than a food which is, bringing from, I don't know, Russia, so many kilometers. I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, because I don't have all that knowledge about the economy, but I think that someone is lying to us about the prices. Like someone there would like us basically to eat poisoned food. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, there's an interesting point about kind of corporate power in our food systems. Yeah.
Yes, and so of course we should educate people, a little more as well, open the eyes. And maybe we eat a little less, but more healthy food. Then I just wanted to mention about something. Have you heard about the project which is called Incredible Seeds Library?
Incredible what?
Seeds.
Seed library.
Spell that?
Yeah, that's,
Oh yes, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Share information in the chat, Ayanna, and we'll definitely
I've already
sharing
put the
those links.
website. Sorry, it's Marie here from Incredible Edibles. I've already put the link to our Incredible Seed Library in the chat further back. We've got a new website, so 10 packs of seeds for everyone. Just pay the postage.
Oh, lovely. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Ayanna.
You couldn't pop it in again, could you?
Yeah,
I'll do that now.
Oh.
Lovely. Yes, Guy, what would you like to say about barriers?
Well, I don't want to be a dampener in all this, and I think what Philip said about values and what others have said about education and what some people said about marketing are all very important. But at the end of the day, actually, the proportion of money that people spend in Britain on food is amongst the lowest in the world. We have incredibly cheap food in this country, and America too. Why is this? It's really because people have to spend an extraordinary amount of money on rent, energy, transport, banking services, and now these days also communications. They don't have much money left over at the end of the day to buy food. So we have created an economic system that requires cheap labor and extremely cheap food. If there wasn't extremely cheap food in this country, people would be in the streets. And this is what actually is beginning to happen now with the strikes we're seeing. So however good we are with our marketing, our education and everything, I really fear actually that there is no way we can compete with the cheap fertilizers, cheap energy and mechanization that produces grain so cheaply in Russia, or at least it used to. And the same with America and Canada. Local food produced by small numbers of people by hand cannot possibly compete with, chemically induced intensive agriculture. Basically, we have to change our entire economic system, I think, if we really, really want to bring about change. My second point would be that some local food is horrendous. Let us not forget the Wye Valley and areas of Wales. I mean, it's happened in Pembrokeshire in history. The rivers have been absolutely destroyed by local intensive agriculture, chicken farms or whatever. We used to fish salmon in the rivers in Pembrokeshire. We don't anymore. So I don't know. I think we have to broaden our horizons, frankly, to really get to grips with this. I mean, I'm speaking from experience. I'm working for an organization that is growing heritage grains organically to mill flour to produce good bread. There is no way we can possibly compete anywhere in price with the cheap Canadian, Russian, Ukrainian, American grain, flour, or grain that is imported to Britain and imported and milled here with, mechanized mills. There's just no way. Thank you.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I've written down in my list of barriers global capitalism, and if we can solve that one, then we're on to a winner. You're absolutely right. The sort of industrial growth society that we inhabit makes this a really difficult mission to pursue. And I think everything you've said kind of underlines the importance of growing the good food movement, and those of us that are able to make different choices, as Zoe said, kind of making those choices, and hopefully finding some momentum amongst us all on ways that we can raise this issue up the agenda. But I do agree that there are global and economic kind of powers and entrenched economic structures that make all this really difficult, which of course is why it hasn't already happened and we haven't already solved this problem. So I suppose what we're trying to do together is find ways to better support local producers like the organisation that you're representing, and to grow the demand for local food in the face of what seem to be insurmountable challenges. And doesn't that just sum up everything we try and do as change makers and activists in these types of conversations? It would be very easy to throw in the towel and give up, but hopefully conversations like this help us to recognise that we're not alone in this mission, and see whether there are opportunities to collaborate to make some kind of difference here where we live. Julian, I'd love to hear from you. Anything further to say on barriers?
Well, first thing says I'm not following Guy again. Gosh, there's an act to follow, isn't it? I have to say I do agree with his point. It was unfortunate timing for me, I think. I think he's absolutely right. Cost is always going to be an issue. The way that food has been produced for a long time is all about cost, and high production and feeding a growing population worldwide. I think there is some stuff that we can do, but we've talked about convenience and we've talked about marketing and education, and the only way that local food is going to get any scale is by going through the bigger distribution networks. So into the supermarkets, into hospitality, and into the public sector. And that can't happen without availability, without collaboration between, whether it be producers, whether it be distribution networks, to actually get the right amount of food at the right time in the right places. And if we've got small farmers all around the country, those farmers on their own can't produce enough food for the school system. So they need to come together and pull together. So there's a lot of collaboration that's needed. And I think Laura was absolutely right when she was talking about that. And I think we can't solve all the problem, but if we can get some more scale in and into networks so it appears in front of people, then it's more likely to happen. If it's not in front of people, we're not going to get any scale at all. People will go to their farmers market for a little while, then they'll go off and do something else, and we'll have the challenges that somebody else was talking about earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Distribution comes up in these discussions as a real opportunity area to connect smaller producers and get them into opportunities to get in front of more people, and how we might enable that kind of collaboration across the region is an important point. Susan, what would you like to say about barriers?
I feel like one of the big problems really is that, as a producer, if you're producing at any kind of scale at the moment, you need a guaranteed market for what you're going to produce. You can't just grow a field of something or other and then just hope that someone will come to the local farmers market and buy it. And I think one of the sort of things that could start it would be for for local authorities and what have you to start to actually support local themselves, because they are a reasonable sized customer in the beginning, which gives a producer at least a bit of something that they can rely on. And I think the other thing that we should always try and remember in all of this is that a lot of the changes. I mean, you know, even our current economic system is based entirely or very, very heavily on reliance on fossil fuel industry. You know, the fertilizers are all produced, you know, a lot of them are produced through that fossil fuel processing, and, you know, transportation costs and all of this kind of thing, importing of food. I personally, I think things will be changing, and quite significantly changing. And for me, the goal is for us to be as ready as we can be when some of those changes happen that are completely outside of our control. Like, we won't necessarily be in a situation where we can determine or to say how things are going to be. Things are going to happen to us. And I think for us, you know, as a local community, the important thing is for us to try and be as prepared for those changes. And food is obviously, we all need the food, we all need, so there's going to be a massive combination of things that we're going to need to do. We can't expect to solve all these problems overnight. We're not going to change everyone from stopping, you know, everyone's not going to suddenly stop shopping in the supermarket overnight. It's just not going to happen. But, you know, if you look back to the time of the pandemic, when supermarkets, when the just-in-time system started to fail a little bit, when the chips are down, if you like, people rely on their neighbours and the people around them. And what we've got to try and do, I guess, is build ourselves into as best position we can, so that when these enforced changes hit us, we've got something rather than nothing. So, you know, I think it's about managing what we're trying to do here as well, rather than maybe living in the slightly, you know, ideal world where everybody cares so much about the local food and the food they're eating. I mean, lots of people don't even know how much is, you know, what the vitamins content of food is, let alone you know, be prepared to pay more for it. But we still need to worry about the changes that we can't control.
Yeah, and I find that a really useful perspective, Susan, in all of this work, is thinking about building the resilience for the times when it's going to become even more important and urgent than it is now. You know, how are we readying ourselves and strengthening and preparing for challenges that will continue to come down the line? Thank you for that thoughtful contribution. Phil, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I was taken with Guy's comments, which, you know, I think were quite profound, really. And I wanted to respond to that. But actually, Julian and Susan and also Alex in the chat, I've kind of like touched on what the point I was going to make was around the role of public sector in starting to chip away at this issue. I think there's real potential there, and I think a lot of politicians, whether it's in Welsh government or, you know, local authorities, are beginning to get it now. You know, this build-up of real challenges around the climate, around health, which point to food. You know, food is a real key factor in a number of the challenges that we are facing, and the fact that food systems just aren't quite working for us or the planet. And as I think those politicians start getting switched on to this, we will see policy changes, and we will see public bodies, you know, really trying to go to respond to those challenges around you know, buying local and trying to promote more nutritious whatever the word is, food. Sorry, it's very late in the evening, isn't it? So, you know, I feel confident about that, or relatively confident about that. And I think part of our role, as well as what Susan's just said about working with communities and preparing communities and so on, I think part of it is about lobbying and really pushing the contacts we have within local authorities, both officers and politicians, to, you know, take up these challenges and really push forward some of these ideas. I'm not sure if I communicated that well, but hopefully I got some sense out of that.
You did, and it's a hopeful perspective that change is beginning to happen within local authorities. So thank you for your insights there. It leads us on to thinking about how might we collaborate, what needs to happen, what would we love to see, and how could we make a difference. Of course, it's always easy to think about all the things that we can't change and how difficult it will be to make a difference. But what could we do individually in our own lives, homes, businesses, organisations, collaboratively as an alliance, stretching across South West Wales, connecting with all different parts of the system, from those decision makers within public procurement and local authorities, small producers, those running markets and other distribution networks. How could we collaborate and what could we do? So take just a moment to jot down a few thoughts quietly, what you would love to see, what you think would be useful, how a group like this or a network like this or a combination of the partners in the room could make a difference. What could we do? What would help to address some of those barriers that we've talked around? Cost, around transport, around knowing where to look, around a better understanding of the different types of value that you can support through your food choices, the inconvenience, the messaging. It's come up a little bit in the chat, but we're talking to younger people about food choices, and sometimes certain groups of people are really interested in health and they're really interested in nutrition and fitness. Perhaps much more so than in local. So are there ways that our messaging could reflect different sets of priorities which actually feed into a similar or aligned agenda around nutritious local food? But what could we do? What are some of the solutions and how might we collaborate? This is a kind of idea generation, crowdsourcing of ideas session, and really hopeful that some of the potential ideas and possibilities that emerge out of this discussion are things that we can potentially take forward together over the next few months. But I'm going to invite you to join a small group conversation, have a little breakout room discussion about solutions, share what you've written down, try and make sure everyone has an opportunity to share their thoughts, and I'll bring you back in about 10 minutes and we'll crowdsource a list of possible solutions. I'll see you shortly.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back. I think that was about 10 minutes. I think the time goes quickly or slowly depending on what conversation you find yourself in, but I hope that was enough time to have a discussion about how we might collaborate better across South West Wales to try and tackle some of these barriers and create a more favourable environment for local growers and producers and increase availability and access to healthy and sustainable local food. Please do share any thoughts in the chat, but more importantly than that, I'm looking for hands up. Anyone who would like to reflect on some solutions, ideas, potential opportunities for collaboration. What works? What works to improve the accessibility of healthy and sustainable local food? How could we collaborate better together, and what shall we do? Mary, thanks for being first. How do you think we could better collaborate?
So, well, call me biased, but I do believe through multi-sector, multi-agency organisations and networks, very much taking on from the themes and things that you've said and everybody here has been speaking about. So I've mostly just been listening and absorbing. And I wanted to just take this small opportunity. Most people be aware of Sustainable Food Places, and Boyd Abertawe is the Sustainable Food Partnership in Swansea, very much working to help make a difference in the Swansea sustainable food system, and just immediately in how. So the steering group is just about to adopt their terms of reference, and part of that is a vision and a food charter that they'll be developing with an aim to launch that, I hope, an aspirational aim, the end of March. And so I'm going to put my email address and also a sign up link for the newsletter for Bwyd Abertawe in the chat, in case you would like to one, sign up to the newsletter to hear more about Bwyd Abertawe, but also, as Bwyd Abertawe has recently been successful in securing a small grant called Cross-Sector Food Partnership Grant, and the steering group will be making a decision about supporting the development of how we can make a difference with some small grants available in the Swansea area. This has not been promoted yet, and the steering group are to make a decision tomorrow. But I want to enable your access, because the information about that small grant will come through the Bwyd Abertawe newsletter. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to support your ways in making a difference and promoting sustainable food change, specifically in the Swansea area. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Yeah, do share the email address in the chat. It's exciting news for Bwyd Abertawe, and potentially other partners from other counties have been successful in securing some of this Welsh Government funding. But yes, partnership working and multi-sector collaborations. I can't quite think of the words you used there, but that is a key driver. So thank you for speaking up, Mary. Jackie, how might we collaborate better across South West Wales to make a difference on all this?
Thanks, Dawn. So I think there's a few issues in relation to the pandemic, made food or processed food, junk food more readily available for families at a cheap cost, such as, you know, just eat and all the other things. I don't know all of them, but you know, you see people cycling around with boxes on their backs, etc., etc., etc. And the other day I must have seen about 10 of them. You know, every time I go to a place, I'm like, what? How are you taking deliveries here, there and everywhere? So that, and we talked about people's time. It's very precious, and how much time it takes sometimes to cook from scratch, and is it easier to just put something in the microwave? One of the things that is big for me is collaboration, and you know, together we're better, rather than, oh, this is mine, I'm keeping it to me. I think we've got to start to learn to trust other people and to share our information much more widely. We often talk also about children and young people not knowing this, that or the other, but actually I think we're giving them short change, to be honest. There are many children that know how to cook from scratch. They've been involved with cooking from an early age and been involved with making things from scratch. So, but I think there's some more work to be done, and taking things into primary school is really important. And Hazel, that was in my group, has an amazing project that's happening in Ceredigion. And I was like, whoa, this is fantastic. We need to find out more about that. How can we get that into every primary school? So yeah, I think it's not being precious. We did talk about lobbying Welsh Government because they're still working in silos. So whatever happens over here isn't filtered out over here. And I think we're just as guilty of that as well. If you've got a project happening in an area, then we need to share that information widely, you know. So yeah, thanks. I'll get off my little box now. Thanks very much, Dawn.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, loads to say there, but sharing information about what everyone's doing and learning from each other is really important. And I'll hope to hear from Hazel when we get into talking about engaging with schools. I'd love to hear a bit more about that project. Thank you, Jackie. Ed from Casachel Foods, how might we collaborate? What would you love to see?
Hi, Dawn. Noswaith bawb. Good to see some familiar faces and new faces on the call as well. I'll just want to highlight something. I was looking for some positive news. So I jumped onto the Food and Drink Wales website, and because the food and drink sector in Wales, led by the Welsh government, and I'm not speaking on their behalves tonight in any official capacity by any stretch. But there's a document on there with the Food and Drink Industry Board, a vision for food and drink from 2021. And it does highlight, there's a forward there by Leslie Griffiths, the Minister. It does highlight the success in the Welsh food and drink sector, the growth achieved since the last document in 2014. And there's some real ambitious targets to grow, to outperform the rest of the United Kingdom, which we are in Wales, and to increase by 8.5 billion. But as I was looking for this information on the document, I typed in schools, and it didn't feature there at all. I typed in food service, it featured once, and I typed in retail, and it featured 12 times. Now, therein lies a bit of a story, because I feel if the focus, I think by and large within Wales, there's been a great focus on putting Welsh produce into the retail sector, and it's on the whole, it's been very successful, and it's been driven by just a few organisations, Welsh Government, Mentor of Business by and large. And I feel that food into the public sector, then into hospitality, it's a very busy area. There's so many stakeholders, and there doesn't seem to be as such one umbrella organisation grabbing it and leading on it. And that might be because we've got 22 local authorities, the NHS, they're split into different trusts, etc. There are reasons behind that. But I think if you want to emulate somebody, perhaps we can emulate what we've done in the retail sector here in Wales. And the figures are there. I'll pop it into the chat function and I'll share it with everybody. So that's probably a bit of positive news there. But I guess I'm going to illustrate good collaboration by highlighting, I'm jumping across to the last agenda item, I think, Dawn, is our conversation last year between Castell Llawel for the region, and we got together with some growers down on the Gower Peninsula there, and we did actually introduce, and Swansea Local Authority, the catering, and we did pull together in the same direction, and we introduced some regionally grown produce onto the menu in Bishopston School. Now, on one hand, I was overjoyed that it came together and it worked, and I guess the school really got on board there, and the youngsters as well. There was a program of activity. I won't go into the detail of it because I'll probably be until 8:30, but the school really got on board, to their credit. And it kind of, the culmination of that was a meal on the Friday of the end of the fortnight, or certainly the end of the week. And typically they feed 250, 260 pupils every day for lunch. There's other people having breakfast. But on this particular day, the numbers went up to 470. And that kind of shows to myself, through everybody pulling together as we did, let's put the finance to one side for 1 minute there. And the children got on board, and perhaps it's all on the For the Region website. There's links there, and there's interviews, that positive things can happen. Now, where, there are still lots of hoops to jump through with audit standards for farms, but it kind of worked. Now, the challenge for us now is to make it work again and again and again and again and again, and to scale up. But we've seen the example I gave earlier about those supplying the retail sector. People can scale up given the right opportunities and the right grant funding. And just with a nod there, at the moment, for companies who are looking for capital investment, manufacturing companies in Wales, to be eligible on expression for interest, you have to demonstrate that you are looking at your carbon footprint, working with apprentices and so on and so forth. Again, I'm not too sure how rigorously that's audited, but it's a step in the right direction to get grant funding. And likewise, I'm very conscious banks are looking at that kind of thing before investing in companies. So there are potentially good things happening, but sometimes it doesn't happen at the pace we'd like it to happen. And there are still quite a few challenges when it comes to the finances. An example I can give, something we worked on in Cardiff there on a couple of vegetables. The market price was £1.50, but the price we paid the farmer, which kind of was more of a, I guess, a farmer's market type price, if that's the right thing, was £2.50 a kilo. But by the time you cost that down and the element of that food within the menu, then the dish itself wasn't 50% more expensive. A little bit of it was, but the whole dish wasn't, and it was, you know, a couple of pennies more. But I'm very conscious that local authorities, especially one we deal with, their budget has been cut by 20 million, and catering teams, they are paper thin. It's very difficult. So, and it's kind of back to that investment really. And I guess the example I started that I opened with in the growth in the retail sector is kind of all private sector, isn't it? I'm driven by large supermarkets, and so there's kind of different dynamics at play there, as opposed to dealing with 22 local authorities and I think, is it 5 or 6 health trusts in Wales? Sorry, I should know, but let's say 5 for now. So collaboration, it definitely can work, but you've got to win hearts and minds, and you've just got to get on and do it and give it a go and hope for the best by and large. Thank you. I think I covered most things there, Dawn.
Yeah, thank you. Some useful insights there, and a nice plug for our Field to Fork work with Bishopston School, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But I think what you're really saying in some ways is get on and do these pilot projects, show what's possible, bring together these collaborations, get on and do it, because it's in that way that we start to create ideas and solutions that then we hope will be taken up and embraced by these kind of paper thin catering teams and under-resourced local authorities. We need to lead the way, don't we, and really show what is possible and make it doable, make it easy and doable. Thank you, Ed. I'm interested to know whether people already know where to look for local produce. Where would you currently go to find produce to buy? Would you go to a farmer's market? Are there websites that are already well adopted across the region? We know there are a variety of different platforms, and so it'd be interesting to understand how we might tackle that question of shining a light on good local producers and promoting businesses and growers who are ready to sell either into our businesses and organisations or directly to consumers. So where do we currently look, and what platforms are out there to address that challenge? And let's hear from some of the other groups. Who else will speak up on solutions? How might we collaborate? What do you think we could do collaboratively across South West Wales to try and amplify the availability of local and sustainable food? I'm having a look in the chat. Word of mouth from other chefs. Dunvant Farms Market, yeah. So local places that people know to go. Open Food Network. Do others refer to that? Are there lots of producers in our region available there on the Open Food Network? Farm Co in Gorstynan, that's another local business that distributes local produce locally here. Google searches. And Margot is suggesting perhaps we need somewhere with profiles of all the local hubs and businesses. Somebody else mentioned earlier on, you know, kind of mapping who's already doing what would be a useful start. Facebook, perhaps people look at. Would anyone like to put up their hand and talk about whether you think a new platform is needed, whether there are existing platforms that producers are already using, and how we can grow the visibility of local food? What else did you talk about in your breakout rooms?
Hi, Dawn. I think we're all too busy reading, aren't we? All too busy reading and writing. The chat has taken over. I could put in a little bit of what we said in our group. We didn't say, maybe not specifics, but we were talking about maybe what came up in the chat earlier, that try and focus maybe on the public sector, on developing public sector custom, rather than trying to compete with supermarkets, you know, cheap supermarkets and that sort of food arena. If we go for public sector, we can get reliability and sort of some contracts maybe, which would work for small local producers. And also we were thinking about the you know, looking at like the full cost recovery, or you know, those terms that are used maybe in the energy sector sometimes, the embodied energy in a food or the embodied costs in a food. Try and remind everybody that all those hidden costs of like the effect on the environment and the effect on local economy, on climate, none of that is costed into cheap supermarket food. Yeah, so to sort of have a bit of a campaign about the hidden costs. Those are sort of more general points, really.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Cara. And I think that kind of raising awareness of those embedded hidden costs is an interesting idea. And I'm, as you say, following the chat here. And Guy, you're talking about the Peninsula Food Hub in St David's, and I wonder whether those food hubs that are up and running already across the region are a good model that we need more of, that bring local food into local communities and reduce the need to travel quite so far to find these things. Guy?
Yeah, it works well. It's been up and running here now for, gosh, more than a couple of years. The idea is that you use, for people who don't know what it is, you use software produced by the Open Food Network, which is a sort of national outfit that has received lots of sort of grants to develop this. And it producers like us, Heritage Grains, advertise, and shoppers click online, they order their produce for, you know, veg, fruit, preserves, meat, all sorts. And then they come and collect. And the great thing is that producers know exactly how many loaves they need to bake or how many tomatoes they need to pick, etc. But what is interesting is that after 2 years, I say we, the community, appear to have hit a ceiling. It's just like we cannot get beyond certain numbers. Okay, in the summer we get a few more because of the tourists, but you know, educating the tourists and they can only pick up on a Saturday sort of limits that a bit. But yeah, we've definitely hit a ceiling, and it goes back to the old thing, you know, affordability, cost, and to some extent convenience, because you have to go on a Saturday morning to pick up the stuff. But it has helped small producers, I must say, but it's not like the answer. It's a help.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. One part of the jigsaw there. And I know Planet have got a project to try and establish more local food distribution hubs that we heard about at the last conference. So there are more and more local food hubs opening, but definitely challenging to run. Zoe?
It was interesting as well during COVID. Someone mentioned earlier how we were all, as we all did, we all looked local. We all relied on local shops to get our food because we couldn't go very far. And actually, the councils produced, each county in our region produced lists of where you could go and get local food, or get deliveries of local food. So I wonder if those lists, in terms of a place of where to go to find out information, I wonder if those lists are kept up to date, if they're still going. They were always just in an Excel spreadsheet or something, wasn't it? Which was a bit of a shame. They went all sort of into some sort of directory or database, but that was always a useful guide as well.
Yeah, I wonder what's happened to those lists. And Phil?
Yeah, just again, Guy got me thinking. And it just popped into my head about, in recent years, this has been a real upsurge in interest in vegan and vegetarian food, and I just wonder whether you know, somehow targeting people who have made that kind of decision for some reasons which would actually link up with what we're talking about anyway, in terms of buying local as well. Whether, you know, there is some way to sort of target people who already are making decisions about changing the way that they eat, in order and to take on board the concept of local, and perhaps also, you know, a bit more fresh than the processed vegan food as well. And also, you know, whether the campaigns that have been around vegetarianism have included things like, you know, maybe just having a meat-free day. So not changing your diet or the way that you buy food overnight, you know, from being supermarket to local, but you know, that concept, I suppose that it does happen to a degree, doesn't it? Because there's the buy local days that you do have every now and then, but maybe at a local or regional level, you know, we could sort of use those kinds of techniques just to try to encourage people, you know, to ease into that kind of change of the way that they look at food and purchase food.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. When I was sort of doing some online research in preparation for this evening's meeting and looking at what other places have done to promote local food, there are quite a few that kind of invite people to make a pledge to spend 10% of their food budget on local options, or as you say, there's kind of pledges and smaller steps rather than seeing it as a massive change. You know, perhaps we can't afford to get everything from our local farmers market, but perhaps we might spend £5 down there each time, or yeah, and looking at our budget and whether we can personally, you know, analysing our own spend. How much do I spend with Farmco and farmers markets versus how much I spend in supermarkets, and could I pledge to expand that? Or are there certain categories of food that are more available locally that we could switch? So I think that is quite helpful to consider. There's loads in the chat which we will be recording and digesting and building up into a report. So thank you for all the contributions and reflections shared in the chat. That is really helpful. We've talked a little bit about schools and opportunities to engage children and young people in projects to promote food on the public plate, or working with school catering departments. And Ed from Castell Howell was kind enough to reflect on the project that we worked on collaboratively with Bishopston School, called Field to Fork. And this was a collaboration that really depended on the involvement of growers on Gower coming forward and with a real appetite to work with schools. And you know, there are loads of challenges in that, and we've written up our findings in a report from that project, and hopefully partners have seen that, or we'll share it when we come to summarise the findings of this meeting. And I wonder whether Hazel, you'd like to share a little bit about your school's project in Ceredigion, and we could reflect together on how to expand our engagement with schools, and any other partners in the room that have insight on the importance and opportunities to engage education, local authority procurement, kids and young people in this conversation. And then I'll show you a video. But who has any updates to share about interesting work engaging with schools? And Julie, if you're there and would like to talk a bit about the Field to Fork project, we'd be delighted to hear from you as well.
think Hazel seems to have unmuted. I think she's ready.
Oh, she's there, Hazel.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. Hi, Dawn. Hi, Dawn. And can I just say thank you to Jamie, who's already sent me an email asking for information about the Harmony School project. So basically, I met Richard Dunn at an event held by Patrick Holden to do with the Sustainable Food Trust. And we started talking, and he told me about his Harmony book, which he created as a head teacher, teaching the children 7 principles based around connecting with nature. And the university felt it was such an amazing book that we should translate that into Welsh, which we managed to do with a little bit of funding. And we've been piloting it now since September with 10 schools in Ceredigion, but each of our schools will get a copy. And one of the schools in particular, they grow their own wheat on the schoolyard. They grow the old hen Gymro, and they take it to the local mill in Llanrysted to turn that then into the flour, which they bring back to the school, and the children bake bread with that. So just before Christmas, I was invited to a Café i Nos, a pop-up cafe that they all arranged, and all the children were responsible for everything. So they baked bread, they made tomato soup from tomatoes that they had grown at the school, and they made an apple crumble from apples they had grown at the school, and the children were responsible. So as you turned up, the children had little, lovely serviettes over their arms, and they took you to your table and they bought you your meal, and they showcased that the process of the baking and the cooking and everything up on a film, which was a rolling film throughout the night. And it was just amazing to see how proud the kids were that they were able to produce that food from things that they had grown. So the school is called Ysgol and I'm sure Haney Thomas, the headmistress, won't mind me mentioning her, because if you wanted her to give a presentation on how they've managed to connect the children with nature, I'm sure she'd be more than happy. They also grow flowers, which they've turned into balm, and they sell at the Mother Vice Centre. So they're learning a range of things in connection with nature. And I put a link into Richard Dunn's English website where you can find out about the Harmony principles and the Harmony curriculum that he's developed. And we are hoping to have a teachers' conference sometime in June at the University in Lampeter, but I'm not sure how wide we'll be extending that, Dawn, but if it is an open event, then I will let you know so that some of these members here tonight might want to come along. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but ideally it would be wonderful for you to invite Richard Dunn maybe to one of these events so he can give you a presentation. And yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible what we're doing with his work at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really great, Hazel. And I wonder what your perspective is on how that kind of initiative with that particular school, what is needed in order to scale that up and deliver that across all schools?
Okay, so why it's important to me and maybe why I'm so involved in it, you need to understand my background. So I grew up on a farm and we were very poor, but we lived on what we grew and what we produced, meat, vegetables. At 16, I went to London to train as a chef. And when I've been back home now for quite a few years, but I benefited from having cookery lessons at school, and I learned how to cook very early on because my mum was always busy out on the farm. My dad was a stonemason, so I ended up in the kitchen a lot. And I really feel that if we can teach our young people what to do with basic ingredients, because my son, I never worry about whether he's eating because he knows how to cook at 23, and my daughter the same. But I just feel we really need to embrace the fact that food education needs to start really young. And if you can bring your children into the kitchen while you're baking, start to teach them. And, who doesn't enjoy being in the kitchen surrounded by ingredients or whatever? So I'm really passionate about what we're doing with Richard Dunn's book, because I see the pleasure and the pride on these children's faces when they've actually produced something themselves. Just as I used to, coming home on the school bus with my box of rock cakes or scones or whatever, when I had been to a cookery lesson at school. And I think somebody mentioned the kitchens in a lot of our secondary schools are now closed, so the food comes in already and it's just a matter of heating it up or whatever. But quite a few schools in Ceredigion still have a cookery department, and cookery is still on the curriculum as a choice. But I think we need to do more. I really feel we need to do more.
Thank you for your insights there. Sounds like a great project. And there are good examples. We've got Jessie from Kaitan, who works with schools across Swansea on related similar sorts of projects where the kids grow ingredients to make their own pizzas. And Jessie has shared before the kind of amazing, inspiring impacts of that project. I know we're all flagging and we're running out of time. I would like to just take this opportunity to share a little video that just captures a few of the messages from our Gower Field to Fork project, and see if you can watch this. I think I'll need to put the sound up. Bear with me 1 second. Multitasking here. Okay.
I'm Julie Jones and I'm one of the project leads. It's called Field to Fork, and it's to try and encourage local organisations such as the council and the schools and local farmers to work together to bring local food to local plates.
Hello, I'm Andrew Oliver. I'm a farmer at Western Slade Farm in Oxford on the Gower. We used to grow vegetables, early potatoes and cauliflowers, about 30 years ago. They were sold mainly to supermarkets. But the prices we started receiving near the latter years, running up towards 1998, 99, were so poor we ceased production.
My name's Ed Morgan from Castle Howell Foods, and we're really proud to be involved in this initiative, bringing vegetables grown in the Gower through our supply chain, through our headquarters in Crosshands, and delivering them back to Bishopston School.
I think this Field to Fork project is really important because you can see the face behind the food you eat. Having locally sourced foods both really good for the farmers and ourselves. And so often food's put in front of us and we don't know where it's from. So it's really nice to see the process too.
So today we have had Castle Howell chefs come in and prepare us meals from locally sourced and produced food on the Gower. It's a whole range, and we've all made a vote and we've chosen that for next week, for the whole school, our 2 meal choices will be barbecue chicken and potato wedges, and the mac and cheese with dessert as brownies.
So today is the day and we're here for Field to Fork, and me and Julie are currently getting the chicken ready that's been cooked for the barbecue sauce to go in, ready for dinner time.
My name is Ethan Brand and this food is delicious because it's made from Gower. It's got local Gower honey and Gower potatoes.
So my name is Caris Davis and I'm Deputy Head here at Bishopston Comprehensive School, and today we are so pleased to be entertaining the Field to Fork project, which is really aimed at promoting Gower farming and using local produce throughout our school. We've had many meetings to get this up and running, and we've worked with some fantastic people. And today we're absolutely thrilled that this has the first launch for us. I've never ever seen this hall so busy. We always get a lot of children through, but today has been something else. And the amount of positive news we've had about the brownies, and they can't believe it's beetroot brownies, and they're loving it. And the barbecue chicken and the mac and cheese, they're having an absolute fantastic experience, and we really hope that this will springboard us to using more local produce in the days and weeks ahead.
We were so excited by that project, and we've got lots of lovely films interviewing the children and hearing from children in the school whose families have had to give up farming because of the difficulties of sustaining their sort of farming businesses, and kids who really do want to connect with where their food comes from. And I think, as Ed said earlier on, you know, where a kitchen, the school kitchen typically provides school dinners to 200 or 250 children in a day, and 470 signed up to have the school meal on that day because of all the work to bring this whole topic into the classroom. That they had maths lessons about how you price your menus and how you work out your costings based on the cost of ingredients. They had opportunities to talk to the chefs from Castell Howell. They had assemblies about the project. They were able to kind of choose the menu. Then the kids were involved in promoting that menu across the school. So it was really holistic. It kind of took over the school for a week or two. Well, from our perspective, for a few months, but from the kids' perspectives, across the school, it was really widely promoted and kind of culminated in this day of this special meal in the kitchen. And Marie asks the question in the chat, and that is the million-dollar question: how can we broaden out this pilot? Castell Howell are, you know, really committed to expanding this project across schools across the counties, looking for candidate schools in different areas and growers to come forward and do a similar thing. But it really opened our eyes to a lot of the challenges. You know, there are challenges in school kitchens, even those schools who still have kitchens, you know, understanding what the constraints are, how quickly meals need to be turned around and served up, what equipment exists in school kitchens, and therefore what meals are possible to deliver. I think we all learned a lot from this process, and it really relied on the positive engagement, not just of, you know, the senior leadership team and the board of governors within the school, which Julie was able to bring into the project. The catering team in the kitchen really needed to be on board with the plan as well. But Swansea Council and the catering team within the council were a key partner, and their willingness to support this project and kind of share the learnings from it was really essential. And we're hopeful that that experience has demonstrated what's possible and whetted everybody's appetite for more of this. But it isn't a given, and for the region hasn't got huge resources to roll this out, which is why we come to you guys with the question of how might we collaborate to grow this sort of project. You know, how can we better engage with all the partners relevant to delivering this kind of thing in schools? So insights and solutions on a postcard, please. We'd be delighted to engage further, and I know all the partners in the project are really keen to do more of this. But as Ed says, not for it to be a kind of special day, although that has its value and definitely has its place, but for this to become part of a transition to catering procurement, building those relationships with local growers and sourcing much more of their produce locally. And it's also, you know, a really important message somebody mentioned earlier on about the importance for growers of having a guaranteed customer. So it's not the case that you can ring up a farm at the end of the growing season and say, oh, we need all these beetroot, or we need all these particular vegetables. Obviously, those seeds need to have been sown quite a few months previous. So that need for collaboration and engagement between buyers and growers early on to kind of plan ahead so that growers know that it's worth growing certain types of vegetable, that they have got a guaranteed customer for that. So we do see that there are opportunities, and you know, we're pleased to be part of some of these kind of pilot projects, but I'm sure there are lots more, and we would love to hear about those. So please keep us up to date with great pilot projects that you see happening elsewhere, and hopefully over the next few months we can do more of this and keep lobbying for the change that we all want to see. So we'll share the links to a lot more insight from that project in the notes arising from these meetings. The chat is really active, but I think I'm not seeing lots of waving hands of people wanting to speak, so I'm starting to feel like the evening's wearing on and we should begin to wrap up. Cara, thank you for coming in right on cue. Any reflections you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I was just remembering, thank you. Yeah, just remembering, I don't know if anyone else has seen it as well or if it's been mentioned in these meetings, but and just remembering that what I've heard about it, a tradition in Japan, I think maybe in the primary sector, where the school classrooms take it in turn, like each classroom has responsibility for doing the catering for the rest of the school for the day. They're sort of like in charge of the kitchen for that day, and they're cooking, they're washing the vegetables and cooking the meal and clearing up afterwards, as with their teacher obviously and with all the kids, and it's just sort of normal, it's a normal part of it. That's their learning for that day. And it rotates around the school. That's obviously, that's not about the content, it's not about the food, but it's certainly a massive learning and a way to get children connected to their food and to cooking and processing. Of course, we're struggling with lack of kitchens, so it's a challenge, isn't it, if all our schools have got getting rid of their kitchens. But I'd love to hear if that's being practiced anywhere in Wales or the UK.
Yeah.
I think there are some schools who don't procure through the public sector that do their own purchasing. Does anyone know any examples of that in South West Wales?
It seems to us that there's a key challenge for schools and for catering departments to keep kids wanting school meals. And I know from my own kids that they quite often really don't like the food that is given to them as school dinners, and they nag me all the time because they want to go pack lunch. And of course then packed lunches seem to me even less nutritious because it's sort of easy, simple things that you can throw in a box for them. So there is a desire, I think, among kitchens and catering departments to make sure they are responding to what parents want and what kids want, and we wonder whether this is a sort of one of the motivations that we need to tap into, encouraging schools and catering departments to innovate and respond in this way. Margot. Can you find your unmute button there?
I've put a note in the chat about Copenhagen because they made a decision that the schools should go organic, and they couldn't get the food from the big producers. So they went out to the regional farms and worked between the regional farms and the cooks in the schools, and they completely shifted the thing. And if a city as big as that can do it against the big food producers, and in Denmark, which has got huge big producers, then it can be done.
Yeah, great to sort of share those examples. Right, an opportunity for any final thoughts or reflections before we close. Has anyone got an important update to share or any news that you would like to mention? You can have a minute to share updates or information with the group. And a reminder that we are reconvening here tomorrow from 10 AM. I know some of you will be joining us for that session as well, and it will be recorded for those of you that can't come along. It's such a huge topic, this, isn't it? And we convene these regional food conferences to try and bring together people from all parts of the food system for these conversations, to connect the dots, to share best practice, and to reaffirm our commitment to the cause in spite of all the obstacles, and there are many obstacles. But hopefully you found this evening's discussion useful in one way or another, and inspiring to hear about good things that are happening, and to connect with others who share the same values around the importance of this agenda for our health, for our environment, for our regional economy, for the well-being of our communities. So please do join us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. if you possibly can. We'll be continuing this discussion, and our focus tomorrow will be on land, access to land, which is a key barrier for the production of more food across Wales. And it's already been mentioned today, but there are lots of competing pressures on land. So what are some of the good examples of how communities and small food growers and new entrants into farming have been able to access land? We'd love to hear any insights and examples that you may wish to share. And then we'll be talking about local and sustainable food in relation to hospitality and tourism. How can we put local food on the map? How can we make sure hospitality businesses, hotels, restaurants, cafes are keeping step with the desire and the demand for more local food across South West Wales? And how can we amplify those amazing cafes, restaurants and other businesses that are doing really well at sourcing and serving local food, and making those connections between the growers and the hospitality businesses? So loads to talk about as always, and I know the evening has worn on and we're all exhausted, but please do get a good night's sleep and come back bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for 10 a.m. tomorrow for that conversation. But for now, I would just like to thank you all very much for being part of this evening's discussion. Thank you for all your contributions in the chat, which we will share. And I'd like to invite you all to unmute yourselves and say goodbye as we wrap up the meeting. So feel free to press unmute and say your goodbyes, and then we'll end the call.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
so much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Nice to see you. Thanks everybody. Bye bye.